His breath was warm, almost too warm against the cold, stagnant air of the ballroom. It brushed against the shell of my ear, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning and everything to do with the raw, terrifying proximity of him. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My body felt like it was made of glass. One sharp movement, one wrong breath, and I would shatter right there on the velvet carpet. I kept my eyes fixed on the centerpiece in front of me, white roses that were already beginning to wilt at the edges. Just like me. I felt a hand, large, steady, and heavy with a quiet authority, rest lightly on the small of my back. It wasn't a hesitant touch. It was a claim. It was the kind of touch that told everyone in the room, this one belongs to me. I hadn't been touched like that in 3 years. Not since the day the world stopped spinning. Not since Marcus. Don't look at them, the voice whispered. It was deep, like a low cello note vibrating in a dark room. It was a voice that commanded the air around it. Look at me. Pretend you are with me. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. 10 feet away, under the soft glow of the chandeliers, Marcus was laughing. He looked perfect. He looked happy. And his hand was resting on the swelling, pregnant belly of the woman he had left me for. The woman who was currently wearing the life I was supposed to have. I finally turned. Fully. My neck felt stiff, my eyes burning. I didn't know this man. He was a stranger with eyes the color of a stormy sea and a suit that cost more than my entire life savings. He was dangerous. He was beautiful. And he was offering me a lifeline made of shadows. I leaned into him. I let my hand slide up his arm, feeling the hard, corded muscle beneath the expensive silk of his jacket. I closed my eyes for a second, inhaling the scent of him, sandalwood, rain, and cold power. Okay, I whispered, my voice cracking, barely audible over the music. I'm with you. They call it a celebration. That's what a wedding is supposed to be, right? But for me, walking into this ballroom felt like walking into my own funeral. My name is Clara. And for the last 3 years I have been a ghost. I didn't die, of course. Not physically. But when Marcus called off our wedding 2 weeks before the date, after I'd found out he'd been funneled money from my father's dying company, after he'd been seeing her, the girl I used to be, vanished. I moved to a studio apartment that smelled like damp walls and cheap coffee. I took a job at a library where the only people who talked to me were elderly men looking for history books. I stopped wearing color. I stopped wearing perfume. I lived in a gray world. But today was my sister's wedding. My mother had called me 6 times, her voice tight with that specific kind of pity that makes you want to scream. Marcus will be there, honey. He's family adjacent now. You have to be brave. Don't make a scene. Make a scene? I didn't have the energy to make a sound, let alone a scene. I had spent 2 hours in front of the mirror this morning trying to paint a face on. Trying to hide the dark circles and the hollow look in my eyes. I wore a dress I couldn't afford, a deep, emerald green silk that felt like a shroud. Walking into that church, I felt every eye on me. The whispers followed me like a trail of smoke. Is that her? She looks so thin. Poor Clara. To see him here with the new wife. I sat at table 12. The pity table. The table for the cousins no one talks to and the friends who were invited out of obligation. I sat there alone, picking at a salad that tasted like dust, watching Marcus across the room. He didn't even look guilty. He looked relieved. Relieved he wasn't trapped with someone as broken as me. The dinner was ending. The speeches were over. The first dance was about to begin. I felt the walls closing in. I felt that familiar, cold panic rising in my throat. I just needed to leave. I needed to go back to my gray apartment where no one could see me bleed. I reached for my clutch, my fingers shaking when the chair next to me slid back. I didn't look up. I assumed it was a waiter or a drunk uncle. But then the air in my immediate radius changed. Heavy. Tart. The salad is terrible, isn't it? I froze. I looked up. He was leaning back in the chair, one arm draped over the velvet upholstery. He wasn't looking at the bride or the groom. He was looking at me. His eyes were piercing, not judgmental but observant. Like he was reading a book I had kept locked for years. I hadn't noticed, I managed to say. Liar, he said softly. A small, ghost of a smirk played on his lips. You've been staring at that leaf of lettuce for 20 minutes like it contains the secrets of the universe. Or like you're trying to disappear into it. I felt a flush of heat rise to my cheeks. Who are you? Someone who hates weddings as much as you do, he replied. He stood up then, extending a hand. He was tall, impossibly tall, blocking out the light from the chandelier. They're starting the dance. If you sit here alone, everyone will keep looking at you with that look. What look? I asked. The look people give to roadkill, he said bluntly. Come, stand with me. Let's give them something else to talk about. I shouldn't have taken his hand. I didn't know him. But the way he looked at me, it wasn't pity. It was a challenge. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt a spark of something other than sadness. I felt a flicker of defiance. As he led me toward the dance floor, the room went quiet. It was a subtle shift, like a wave receding from the shore. People weren't looking at the happy couple anymore. They were looking at the man in the $5,000 suit who was currently guiding the tragic Clara through the crowd. I saw Marcus out of the corner of my eye. He was mid-sentence, laughing with my father's old business partner. He stopped. His glass stayed frozen halfway to his mouth. His eyes widened, scanning the man standing beside me. You're shaking, the stranger whispered as we stood at the edge of the floor. He didn't just take my hand, he wove his fingers through mine. It was so intimate it felt like a bruise. He pulled me closer, his chest nearly brushing mine. Look at Marcus, he commanded softly. I can't, I whispered. Yes, you can. Look at him. See the look on his face. He's not pitying you anymore, Clara. He's wondering who I am. And he's wondering why he's not the one holding you. I looked, and he was right. Marcus looked confused. He looked jealous. I felt a surge of adrenaline so sharp it made my head light. I leaned my head toward the stranger, letting my hair brush his shoulder. I played the part. I let myself pretend that I was loved, that I was wanted, that I was the most important woman in the room. But as he leaned down to brush his lips against my temple, a gesture so tender it felt real, he whispered something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. You're doing great, Clara. But don't get too comfortable. Because Marcus isn't the only reason I'm at this table tonight. And I'm not here for the cake. I pulled back just an inch, my heart stopping. What do you mean? His eyes went dark, the playfulness gone. I mean that by the end of this night, you're going to have to decide if you want to keep being a ghost, or if you want to become a queen. Marcus was moving toward us like a heat-seeking missile. I could see the sweat on his upper lip even from across the room. The golden boy wasn't looking so golden anymore. He looked rattled. He looked small. Beside me, Gabriel Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't even acknowledge Marcus's approach until he was standing right in front of us, smelling of gin and desperation. Clara. Marcus's voice was thin, reeking of a fake concern that made my stomach turn. What is this? Who is this man? Gabriel's grip on my waist tightened just enough to be a reminder of who was in control. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at me, his thumb tracing a slow, deliberate circle against the silk of my dress. I don't believe we've met, Gabriel said, his voice smooth and cold as polished marble. He finally turned his gaze to Marcus and I saw Marcus actually flinch. I'm Gabriel. And Claire is with me. Is there a problem? Marcus stammered. I'm an old friend. Family really. Claire, can I talk to you? Privately. I felt the old Clara, the ghost, wanting to shrink away. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to hide. But then I felt the heat radiating from Gabriel's body. I felt the strength in his arm. And I remembered the way Marcus had looked at her pregnant belly. There's nothing you can say to me, Marcus, I said, my voice steadier than I ever thought possible. That you can't say in front of Gabriel. The look on Marcus's face was worth every second of the last 3 years of misery. He looked like he'd been slapped. He backed away, mumbling something about checking on his wife, leaving us standing there in a vacuum of silence. Well played, Gabriel whispered, his lips inches from my ear. Now let's get out of here before the ghosts catch up to us. The ride in Gabriel's car was silent. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows like streaks of neon paint. The interior of the car smelled like him, leather and success. I sat as far away from him as the seat allowed, my heart finally slowing down, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. Who are you, Gabriel? I asked, staring at my reflection in the glass. And don't give me the someone who hates weddings line. You're Gabriel Thorne. I know the name. You're the man who buys companies and guts them for parts. He didn't look at me. He was staring straight ahead at the road. I'm a man who knows a good investment when he sees one, Clara. And right now, you are the most undervalued asset in this city. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. He laid it on the armrest between us. My family's firm, Thorn Global, is in the middle of a power struggle, he began, his voice devoid of emotion. My grandfather built that empire on tradition. His will is very specific. I cannot take the seat of chairman unless I am married by my 33rd birthday. That birthday is in 3 weeks. I laughed, a dry, bitter sound. So this is a cliché? You need a fake wife to get your inheritance. No, he said, turning to look at me. The intensity in his eyes made my breath hitch. I don't need a wife for the money. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I need a wife to stop the board of directors from handing the company over to your ex-fiance's new partners. I froze. What? Marcus didn't just leave you, Clara, Gabriel said, his voice dropping an octave. He was paid to dismantle your father's shipping business so my competitors could swallow it whole. He was the inside man. He traded your father's life's work for a seat at a table he wasn't invited to. And right now, those same people are trying to take my company. The air in the car felt thin. The betrayal I had felt for 3 years suddenly grew teeth. It wasn't just a broken heart. It was a heist. I want to offer you a contract, Gabriel continued. A marriage of convenience. 1 year. You live in my house. You attend every event on my arm. You look at me like I'm the sun and the moon. And what do I get? I asked, my voice trembling. Revenge, he said simply. I will give you the resources, the evidence, and the legal power to bury Marcus and everyone he works for. By the time we're done, he won't have enough money to buy a coffee, let alone a seat on a board. And at the end of the year, I'll settle $10 million into a private account for you. You'll never have to be a ghost again. I looked at the envelope. It was a choice. I could go back to my gray apartment, my stacks of library books, and my quiet loneliness. Or I could step into the fire with a man who looked like he could burn the world down. Why me? I whispered. You could hire an actress. You could find a socialite who would jump at this. Gabriel reached out. He didn't touch my face, but his hand hovered just an inch away, the heat of it making my skin prickle. Because an actress would be acting, he breathed. But you actually hate them. That kind of fire can't be faked. And because when I saw you sitting alone at that table, I saw someone who wasn't just sad. I saw someone who was waiting for a reason to fight back. He leaned in closer, his eyes searching mine. Be my reason, Clara. And I'll be your weapon. 24 hours later, I was standing in the foyer of the Thorn estate. It was a fortress of glass and stone overlooking the ocean. It was cold, beautiful, and terrifying. Gabriel stood at the top of the grand staircase looking down at me. He had traded his suit for a black cashmere sweater, looking less like a businessman and more like a king in his castle. Your room is the 3rd door on the left, he said. The wardrobe is already filled with everything you'll need. My assistant will be here at 8 tomorrow to begin your transformation. Transformation? I asked, clutching my small worn suitcase. We have a gala tomorrow night, Clara. Marcus will be there. His new partners will be there. This isn't just a move-in. It's a declaration of war. He started to turn away, then stopped. One more thing. Rule number 1. We don't talk about the past in this house. In this house, we are a couple who met in Paris and fell in love at first sight. If you start believing the lie, so will they. I watched him walk away, his footsteps echoing on the marble. I walked up to my room, opening the massive mahogany doors. The closet was filled with silks, furs, and jewels. But as I sat on the edge of the massive empty bed, I realized I had traded one kind of silence for another. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a bird in a gilded cage. I opened the bedside drawer to put away my phone and my heart stopped. Tucked away at the very back was a small, candid photograph of me. It wasn't from the wedding. It was from 2 years ago, taken through a rainy window while I was working at the library. Gabriel hadn't just seen me at the wedding. He had been following me. I stared at the photograph until the edges blurred. It was me. 2 years ago. My hair was longer then, my face thinner. I was sitting at the library desk, staring out at the rain with a look of utter hopelessness. Gabriel hadn't stumbled upon me at the wedding. He hadn't rescued me on a whim. This was a hunt, and I was the prize he had been tracking for years. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of the house pressing down on me. At 3 a.m. I couldn't take the silence anymore. I wrapped myself in a silk robe, one of the many gifts waiting in my closet, and stepped out into the hallway. The house was a tomb of expensive things. I wandered down the grand staircase, my bare feet silent on the cold marble, until I saw a sliver of light spilling from under a heavy oak door. Gabriel's study. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open. He was sitting behind a desk the size of a small car, the only light coming from a single desk lamp and the amber glow of a glass of scotch. He didn't look up. He knew it was me. "You're awake," he said. His voice was rougher than it had been in the car. "Why is there a picture of me in my bedside drawer from 2 years ago, Gabriel?" I didn't whisper. I didn't tremble. The shock had turned into a cold, hard stone in my chest. He finally looked up. He didn't look guilty. He looked tired. "I told you, Clara. I've been watching the people who were destroyed by the men I'm fighting. I needed to know if you were strong enough to survive what comes next. You watched me for 2 years. You watched me struggle to pay rent. You watched me cry in that library." I walked toward the desk, my hands clenched. "And you did nothing?" Gabriel stood up slowly. He walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of me. The air between us felt thick, charged with a sudden violent electricity. "I couldn't help you then," he breathed, stepping into my personal space. "If I had stepped in too early, they would have seen the connection. I had to wait until you had nothing left. Because a woman with nothing left is the most dangerous thing in the world." He reached out, his fingers grazing my jawline. I should have pulled away. I should have slapped him. But his touch was the only warm thing in this cold, empty palace. "Don't mistake my patience for cruelty," he whispered. "I was waiting for the right moment to give you back your life." The next morning, the transformation Gabriel promised began. It wasn't a makeover. It was a reconstruction. A team of people arrived at 8 a.m. They didn't talk to me, they worked on me. My hair was treated until it shone like spun silk. My nails were buffed into sharp, almond points. A makeup artist spent an hour contouring my face until my cheekbones looked like they could cut glass. Then came the dress. It was a custom-made gown of midnight blue velvet. It was heavy, regal, and so tight it felt like a second skin. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the librarian. I didn't see the ghost. I saw a woman who looked like she could start a war and end it in the same breath. Gabriel was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. He was in a tuxedo, looking impossibly sharp. When he saw me, he went perfectly still. For a fleeting second, the mask of the cold businessman slipped, and I saw a flicker of something raw in his eyes. "Obsession." "Clara," he said, his voice low. "I don't feel like myself," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Good," he said, walking toward me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. Inside was a necklace, diamonds the size of raindrops, circling a sapphire as deep as the ocean. He stood behind me to put it on. His fingers were cold against my neck, but his breath was hot against my skin. "Tonight, you are the future of Thorn Global," he whispered into my ear. "When we walk into that room, Marcus will try to talk to you. He will try to remind you of who you used to be. Do not let him. You are Clara Thorn now. Remember that." The gala was held in a glass ballroom perched on top of a skyscraper. It was a sea of black ties, expensive perfume, and fake smiles. As soon as we entered, the room went silent. Gabriel didn't lead me. We walked side by side, our hands entwined. I could feel the eyes on us, the judgment, the curiosity, the envy. And then I saw him. Marcus was standing near the bar, holding a drink and looking utterly out of place in a room full of true power. When he saw me, he actually dropped his glass. The sound of shattering crystal echoed in the sudden hush. He walked toward us, his face a mask of disbelief. "Clara, what have you done to yourself?" Gabriel didn't give me a chance to answer. He pulled me closer, his arms sliding around my waist in a possessive grip. "She hasn't done anything to herself, Marcus. She's finally found someone who knows her value." Marcus looked at the diamonds around my neck. He looked at the way I was leaning into Gabriel. "This is a joke, right? You're with him for the money? Clara, this isn't you." I looked Marcus straight in the eye. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to cry. I felt power. "You're right, Marcus," I said, my voice projecting across the small circle of socialites that had gathered to watch the drama. "This isn't the girl you left in the dirt. That girl is dead." You killed her. And honestly, I should thank you for it. If you hadn't shown me how little you were worth, I never would have found out what I was truly capable of." The crowd murmured. Marcus's face turned a deep, ugly red. He looked like he wanted to scream, but he was surrounded by the very people he was trying to impress. "Enjoy the party, Marcus," Gabriel said with a shark-like grin. "But I'd keep an eye on your drink. You seem to have a habit of losing things that don't belong to you." We left the gala early. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me hollow and exhausted. When we got back to the estate, I headed straight for my room, but Gabriel caught my hand at the door. "You were perfect tonight," he said. "Is that all this is to you?" I asked, turning to face him. "A performance? A perfect score." He didn't answer. He just looked at me, his gaze dropping to my lips. The tension that had been building since that first dance at the wedding finally snapped. He didn't ask. He just leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a fake kiss for the cameras. It was desperate. It was hungry. It tasted like all the things we weren't allowed to say. My hands found their way into his hair, pulling him closer, needing the friction, needing to feel something real in this house of lies. He pushed me back against the door, his weight pinning me there. His hands were everywhere. My waist, my hair, my shoulders. "Clara," he groaned against my neck. "I've wanted to do that since the first time I saw you in that library." But then I felt it. A small, cold lump in his jacket pocket. I pulled away, breathless. "What is that?" He froze. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. It was still running. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't just kissed me. He had been recording us. He needed the sound of my voice, the sound of our intimacy, for some legal move against the board. The kiss wasn't real. It was evidence. I looked at the recorder, then at Gabriel's unreadable face. "How much of tonight was real, Gabriel?" I whispered, the tears finally starting to fall. "The dress? The diamonds? The kiss? Or am I just a voice on a tape to you?" Gabriel didn't answer. He just reached out to touch my face, but I flinched away. "Don't," I choked out. "I'd rather be a ghost than a prop." I slammed the door in his face, leaving him standing in the dark hallway holding a lie in his hand. I stayed behind that locked door for hours, listening to the silence of the mansion. The diamonds felt like lead around my neck. I unhooked the sapphire necklace and watched it hit the velvet carpet without a sound. It was beautiful, expensive, and utterly meaningless. Gabriel had turned my heart into a tactical advantage. He hadn't just tracked me for 2 years. He had waited until my spirit was crushed so he could mold me into the perfect weapon. I realized then that I wasn't his partner. I was his project. But as the sun began to peek through the heavy curtains, the anger replaced the hurt. If I was a weapon, it was time I learned how to aim myself. I waited until I heard Gabriel's car pull out of the long driveway at 7 a.m. He was heading to the city for a board meeting, the final push to secure his chairmanship. I knew his assistant, Sarah, would be occupied with the fallout of the gala. This was my only chance. I didn't go back to the library books. I went to the one place Gabriel had told me was off limits. The basement archives. The basement didn't look like the rest of the house. It was sterile, filled with rows of black filing cabinets and server towers that hummed like a low-grade fever. I didn't have a passcode for the servers, but Gabriel was an old-school man in some ways. I began searching the physical files under the T4 Thorn Global. But it wasn't there. I searched under M4 Marcus. Nothing. Then I saw a dusty, unmarked crate in the corner. Inside were files labeled with my father's company name, Sterling Shipping. My breath hitched. These weren't just business records. These were private investigators' reports. Photos of my father's office. Phone logs. And then a coroner's report. My father's death had been ruled a heart attack brought on by the stress of the company's bankruptcy. That's what Marcus told me. That's what the doctors told me. But as I flipped through the pages, I found a handwritten note clipped to the back of a laboratory result. It was Gabriel's handwriting. The dosage was too high. The outcome was unintended. Secure the sterling assets before the widow files for an audit. The room spun. My father hadn't just died from stress. He had been assisted. And Gabriel Thorne, the man I had just shared a desperate, soul-shattering kiss with, had been the one holding the leash. He didn't save me from the wreckage. He was the one who crashed the ship. I was sitting in the middle of the grand foyer when Gabriel returned. I wasn't wearing the velvet dress or the diamonds. I was wearing my old faded jeans and the gray sweater I had arrived in. The ghost was back. He walked in looking triumphant. He had a bottle of vintage champagne in one hand and his briefcase in the other. He stopped when he saw me sitting on the bottom step, the sterling shipping file resting on my lap. The triumph drained from his face so fast it was almost comical. He didn't say a word. He didn't try to lie. He just set the champagne down on the marble floor with a quiet clink. "How long have you known?" I asked. My voice was a dead thing. "Clara," he started, taking a step toward me. "Don't." I screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "Don't you dare say my name. You killed him. You used Marcus to destroy the company, and when my father became a problem, you removed him." Gabriel stood perfectly still. For the first time I saw a crack in his armor. Not guilt, but something that looked like profound, agonizing regret. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he said, his voice a low growl. "Marcus was supposed to just buy him out. But Marcus is a coward and a fool. He panicked. He tried to pressure your father, and when your father threatened to go to the authorities, Marcus took matters into his own hands. I didn't know until it was too late. But you covered it up," I spat. "You watched me lose everything. You watched me become a shell of a person, and then you invited me into your home to play make-believe, so you could win a corporate war. I did it to protect you," Gabriel roared, crossing the space between us in 3 strides. He grabbed my shoulders, his eyes burning with a dark, obsessive light. "If the board knew you had the grounds for a wrongful death suit, they would have finished what Marcus started. I brought you here to keep you safe. To give you the power to destroy Marcus yourself. By marrying the man who paid for the hit?" I laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "You're not my savior, Gabriel. You're just the shark that ate the piranha." I pushed past him, heading for the door. I didn't care where I went. I would sleep on the street before I spent another night in this house. "If you walk out that door," Gabriel said, his voice suddenly cold and professional again, "Marcus wins. He's at the docks right now, Clara. He's finalizing the sale of your father's last remaining fleet to a shell company. Once that ink is dry, the evidence in that file is useless. He'll be untouchable." I stopped with my hand on the cold brass handle. "I have the recording," Gabriel continued, walking up behind me. I could feel the heat of him, the scent of sandalwood and rain that I had grown to crave. "The one from last night. It's not just us kissing, Clara. I caught Marcus on a hot mic earlier that evening. He admitted to the sterling incident, while he was drunk at the bar. But I can't use it without your testimony. We have to go to the docks. Together." I turned to look at him. I saw the man who had ruined my life and the only man who could help me fix it. It was a deal with the devil. "One condition," I said, my voice trembling. "After tonight I never see you again. I want the money, I want the company back, and I want you gone." Gabriel's face went pale. His jaw tightened so hard I thought it might break. He looked at me with a longing so deep it was almost physical. A look that said he would rather die than let me go. "Fine," he whispered. "Let's go finish this." The docks were shrouded in a thick, salty fog. The sound of the waves crashing against the rusted pillars felt like a heartbeat. We saw Marcus standing near a black SUV, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. He was holding a pen, a stack of papers resting on the hood of the car. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. "Wait for my signal," Gabriel whispered, checking a small device on his wrist. "Once he signs, the transaction becomes a federal crime. We'll have him on tape and in the act." But as we watched from the shadows of a shipping container, a 3rd car pulled up. A woman stepped out. It was Marcus's wife, the woman he had left me for. She looked terrified. "Marcus, stop," she screamed. "The police. They're at the house. They know everything." Marcus panicked. He didn't reach for the papers. He reached for something inside the SUV. A flash of silver. "He has a gun," I breathed, my heart stopping. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He pushed me back behind the steel container. "Stay here. No matter what happens, do not come out." A single shot rang out, echoing through the fog. I heard a scream, then the sound of a body hitting the wet concrete. "Gabriel!" I screamed, breaking my promise and running into the mist. I saw a figure slumped against the wheel of the SUV. But it wasn't Gabriel. It was Marcus. And standing over him with blood blooming across his white dress shirt and a look of pure murderous obsession in his eyes, was Gabriel Thorne. "I told you," Gabriel rasped, his voice failing as he slumped to his knees. "I'd do anything for you." The world turned into a series of jagged images. The gray fog, the crimson stains spreading across Gabriel's white shirt, and the hollow, terrifying silence of Marcus lying still on the concrete. "Gabriel!" I screamed, my voice tearing through the salt air. I didn't care about the files. I didn't care about the company. I reached him just as his knees buckled. I caught him, the weight of his body nearly pulling me down into the oil-slicked puddles. "Stay with me," I sobbed, pressing my hands against his chest. The warmth of his blood seeped through my fingers, the same hands that had worn his diamonds just hours before. "Gabriel, look at me." His eyes were unfocused, searching the dark sky before they finally locked onto mine. He reached up, his fingers trembling, and touched my cheek. He left a streak of red across my skin. "You're safe," he rasped, his breath hitching. "The recorder. It's in my pocket. Take it and run, Clara. I'm not leaving you." The sirens were deafening now. Blue and red lights sliced through the fog. Men in uniforms swarmed the docks, shouting commands I couldn't understand. I felt hands pulling at me, trying to drag me away from him. I fought them. I screamed until my throat burned. The last thing I saw before they lifted him onto the stretcher was his face, pale, hauntingly calm, and still looking at me as if I were the only thing left in a crumbling world. The hospital was a different kind of hell. It smelled of bleach and impending death. I sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room for 12 hours. I still had his blood under my fingernails. I refused to wash it off. It was the only part of him I had left. The news was already breaking on the television mounted in the corner. Billionaire Gabriel Thorne in critical condition after dockside shootout. Marcus Sterling pronounced dead at the scene. Scandal rocks Thorne Global as embezzlement scheme unravels. I watched the screen with a numb detachment. The ghost of Table 12 was now the lead story on every channel. They showed photos of us at the gala. Gabriel looking at me with that fierce, protective hunger. They called me the mystery woman. They had no idea I was just a girl who had lost her father and was now losing the man who had avenged him. Gabriel's lawyers arrived in a swarm of expensive wool coats. They tried to hand me papers. They tried to get me to sign non-disclosure agreements. Mr. Thorne's instructions were very clear. One of them said, his voice devoid of empathy. "In the event of his incapacitation, you are to be granted full control of the Sterling shipping assets and a liquid settlement of $10 million. We just need your signature to finalize the separation." Separation. I whispered. "The deal, Mississippi. The contract is over. You've won." I looked at the pen. I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go. This was everything I had wanted. My father's legacy was back. My bank account was full. My enemies were dead or in prison. I picked up the pen and snapped it in half. "I'm not signing anything," I said, standing up. "I'm not leaving until he wakes up." 3 days passed. Gabriel was in a medically induced coma. He had lost a lung and enough blood to kill 3 men, but his heart, that cold, calculating, obsessive heart, refused to stop beating. On the 4th day, Gabriel's mother arrived. She was a woman made of ice and old money. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me like I was a virus that had infected her son. "You've done enough damage, Clara," she said, her voice echoing in the private wing of the hospital. "Gabriel risked everything for this obsession. He threw away our family's reputation for a girl from a bankrupt shipping family. Do you have any idea what this has cost us?" "He didn't do it for the reputation," I said, facing her. "He did it because he was the only one brave enough to face the truth." "The truth is that you are a liability," she hissed. "The board is meeting tomorrow. They are moving to strip him of his titles while he's unconscious. They're using the shooting as grounds of instability. If you truly care for him, you'll take the money and disappear. If you stay, you'll both be ruined." She leaned in, her eyes cold. "He sacrificed his life for you. The least you can do is sacrifice your pride for his legacy. Leave him and the board will back down. Stay and he wakes up to nothing." I walked into Gabriel's room that night. The machines were humming, breathing for him. He looked so small beneath the white sheets, stripped of his power, stripped of his secrets. I sat by his bed and took his hand. It was cold. You told me to pretend, I whispered, my tears falling onto his knuckles. You told me to pretend I was with you. You told me to look at you like you were the sun and the moon. I leaned down, pressing my forehead against his. I wasn't pretending, Gabriel. That was the one part of the contract I couldn't keep. I knew what I had to do. If I stayed, the Thorne family would destroy him to get to me. They would tie him up in scandals and lawsuits until there was nothing left of the empire he had worked his whole life to build. He had saved my father's legacy. Now I had to save his. I stood up and pulled a small envelope from my pocket. It wasn't the contract. It was a letter. I walked out of the hospital at 4 a.m. I didn't take the $10 million. I didn't take the car. I walked until my feet ached, back to the gray part of the city, back to the silence. The next morning, Gabriel opened his eyes for the first time. The room was empty. There were no diamonds on the nightstand. Only a single wilted white rose from a wedding centerpiece and a note that read, "The pretend is over. Now go live the life you fought for." But as Gabriel clutched the note, his heart rate monitor began to spike. He didn't look relieved. He looked like a man who had just realized that winning the war meant losing the only thing worth fighting for. 1 year. It's funny how a year can feel like a century when you're waiting for a ghost to stop haunting you. I went back to the only life I knew. I moved to a different city, a small coastal town where the air smelled of salt and the people didn't know my name. I worked in a bookstore. I wore my old sweaters. I lived in the gray again. But it was a different kind of gray. It wasn't the gray of a victim. It was the gray of a survivor. I had used the small portion of the sterling assets I kept, just enough to rebuild my father's original modest office, to start a foundation for families ruined by corporate fraud. I didn't want the 10 million. I didn't want the Thorne name. I just wanted to do what my father would have done. Every morning I would sit at a small cafe by the water and read the news. Thorne Global reaches record heights. Gabriel Thorne, the man who returned from the dead. Billionaire CEO remains most eligible bachelor, rumored to be still searching for lost love. I would touch the newsprint, my fingers tracing the grainy photo of his face. He looked harder, older, but he was alive. I had kept my side of the sacrifice. I had disappeared, and in exchange his family had stopped their war against him. He was the king again. And I was just a girl by the sea. Then came the invitation. It wasn't for a gala. It wasn't for a corporate merger. It was a simple handwritten note on cream-colored paper. My sister was renewing her vows. 1 year later she wanted the family back together. She wanted me there. I almost didn't go. I didn't want to see the pity in my mother's eyes. I didn't want to see the ghost of Marcus in the shadows of the church. But something pulled at me. A sense of closure. I arrived late. I didn't wear midnight blue velvet. I wore a simple soft white dress that flowed like the tide. No diamonds. No sapphire. Just me. The reception was held in a garden under a canopy of fairy lights. It was beautiful, warm, and real. I sat at a table near the back, not the pity table, just a table. I watched my sister dance. I watched the world go by. And then the air changed. It was that same feeling. That heavy, charged electricity that makes the hair on your arms stand up. The scent of sandalwood and rain cut through the smell of the gardenias. I didn't turn around. My heart began to beat a rhythm I hadn't felt in 12 months. Thump thump. Thump thump. A shadow fell over my table. A large, steady hand rested on the back of my chair. "You're staring at the roses again," the voice whispered. It was deeper now, scarred by the memory of a ventilator, but still as smooth as silk. "And they still haven't told you their secrets." I turned, my breath hitching in my throat. Gabriel. He wasn't leaning on a cane anymore. He stood tall, his eyes more stormy than I remembered, his face etched with the lines of a man who had spent a year in the wilderness. He wasn't wearing a $5,000 suit. He was wearing a simple jacket, his collar open, looking human. "How did you find me?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "I never lost you, Clara," he said, pulling out the chair next to me and sitting down. He didn't look at the wedding. He looked only at me. "I spent a year letting you have your peace. I spent a year making sure the world was safe for you to come back to. But the year is up. The contract is over. Gabriel, your family, the company." "I left," he said simply. I stared at him. "You left Thorne Global?" I realized that being a king in a castle is a very cold existence when the only person you want to rule with is 300 miles away in a bookstore. He reached across the table, weaving his fingers through mine. His touch was warm. It wasn't a claim this time. It was a request. I don't have a throne anymore, Clara. I just have me. Is that enough? The music shifted. A slow, haunting melody began to play. The same song the band had played a year ago when Marcus was laughing and I was dying inside. Gabriel stood up and held out his hand. "One dance," he said. "No cameras. No board members. No revenge. Just a dance." I took his hand. As he led me to the floor, the world didn't go quiet. People didn't whisper. We were just two people among many. He pulled me close, his arm wrapping around my waist, his chest flush against mine. I leaned my head against his shoulder, closing my eyes, inhaling the scent of the man who had burned his world down just to find me in the ashes. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of my ear, mirroring that very first night. "Clara," he whispered. "Yes. Don't pretend," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't pretend you're with me. Just be with me." I pulled back just enough to look into those stormy eyes. I reached up, my hand tracing the faint scar on his chest beneath his shirt, the mark of his sacrifice. "I'm not pretending, Gabriel," I said, a tear finally escaping and rolling down my cheek. "I haven't been pretending for a long time." I leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a kiss for a recorder. It wasn't a kiss for an audience. It was the powerful, quiet resolution of two broken souls finally finding the peace that fit. A year ago I sat alone at a wedding waiting for my life to end. Today I stood in the arms of the man who showed me that sometimes, you have to lose the whole world to realize that the only person you ever needed was the one whispering in your ear, telling you that you weren't alone. The ghost was gone. The queen was home.